And we have a compelling guest today. We will not reconvene until January 5th of next year, and we look forward to seeing all of you then. But today our guest is Beaux Jones. He's president and CEO of the Water Institute, which has been in existence for 15 years, and it is at the forefront of the economy, the environment, and the future of our state. And as we know, we have some existential challenges in Louisiana. And Beaux is a fascinating fellow. He's a lawyer, graduate of LSU's Law Center. He went to college at Davidson, played quarterback there, and his father was a pretty good quarterback. He was the second player taken in the 1973 NFL draft, a guy named Beaux Jones. Last LSU player to win the MVP in the NFL, by the way. And his grandfather still holds the NFL record for most touchdowns in a game, 6, with the Cleveland Browns, and he was the second player taken in the 1946 draft, 27 years before his dad. But Beaux has taken a different route, and he is involved in issues and challenges that our state has to address if we want to continue to be the state we know and love. And he's here to talk about the Water Institute. Beaux Jones.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thanks everybody for having me. I am happy to talk about any of those things, including football, particularly the Ruston High School Bearcats, who unfortunately lost the state championship game this weekend. I know y'all are all as upset as I am, but it was a tough loss for the Bearcats. I'll just go ahead and have a word of caution. Jim invited me to do this several months ago, and I failed to write it down on Notepad or on a calendar. So when Jim called me on Friday to say, hey, are you doing this? I said, oh, yeah, I am. So what I'm going to try and do is many of you possibly know a lot about the Water Institute and the work that it's done and the work that it's set up to do. Some of you may know nothing about it. Some of you may have only seen the big, beautiful building out on the levee just south of, or just downriver of the bridge, and wondered what goes on in there. So I'm going to try and reorient everybody to have the same amount of information as to what this thing is, what the idea was 15 years ago when this thing was created. You know, I will go ahead and say, you know, at the outset, I'm not an advocate. We are not an advocacy organization. But one of the things that I am really bullish about the opportunities for the state. I am really bullish about the importance not only of the state as it exists, but the importance of the things that are happening in the state from a research and a policy planning and a governance standpoint. They are important not only for us, but for outside of it. So, as Jim said, I am an environmental lawyer by training. I'm not a scientist. I call myself science adjacent. I have the privilege of working with just around 80-plus brilliant individuals at the Water Institute, the majority of whom sit here between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, but we have team members scattered across 18 different states, and we've grown considerably since COVID, or during COVID, and so we're a little geographically dispersed than we were. So what was this Water Institute? What was this idea? So 2005, everybody remembers 2005, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, right? The state was on its knees trying to determine how to recover, rebound, find resilience in the face of all of these terrible tragedies. And it was at this time that there was an idea and a conversation that was started largely by state and Baton Rouge area leaders to say, you know what? We recognize that we have existential challenges. We know that we have rising seas, we have these storms, we have land loss. Everybody's very familiar. There's fantastic reporting and science done that since 1931, the state of Louisiana has lost roughly the equivalent of the state of Delaware. We have lost an entire U.S. state into the Gulf. So with all these problems compounding, the idea wasn't just let's push back, let's build bigger levees, let's build new land, let's stop the flow. That was one of the pieces. And I will say unequivocally there has been incredible work done both in protection, preservation, and restoration and planning since 2005 and starting before. But one of the other ideas that came out from the local leadership was, we also want to make sure that we're the ones helping ourselves solve these problems, right? This is existential to people like me who are born and raised in Louisiana, and all of you who live here. It is an existential challenge, but there's also an opportunity buried in that existential challenge. And the opportunity is, rather than rely on the Dutch, right, which the Dutch are fantastic thinkers from, coastal protection and restoration and floodplain management. And after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, the Dutch came in and helped us greatly, right? But the idea was, how do we create this intellectual capital, this economic opportunity, this research and intellectual opportunity here in Louisiana, and then be the experts that everybody else calls on? And that has in a lot of ways happened. And the Water Institute was created first to help the state of Louisiana with its existential challenges. So one of the things that we have been working on since day one is the state of Louisiana's game plan, the Coastal Master Plan, Louisiana's Comprehensive Coastal Master Plan, the 50-year, $50 billion program. But also the idea was, can we help catalyze this innovation, this intellectual capital that it does not, by no means does it exist only within the walls of the Water Institute, but in our universities, in our architectural and engineering firms, in our government agencies, in our political subdivisions, in our non-government and nonprofit organizations? Can we help catalyze this intellectual capital and then serve as a beacon for other communities? And I can say very proudly, also recognizing that there's much work to be done, that over the last 15 years, both of those things have happened. And the Water Institute has been proud to play a part of that. First thing is that Coastal Master Plan. The Coastal Master Plan is here. The most recent annual plan, as many of you will know, was released last Wednesday and is out for public comment. But also, our organization, our partner organizations, the local universities are working all over the country on these issues. We are working in Jacksonville and Virginia and Charleston and Texas and Mobile, all across the Gulf South and all across the Mid-Atlantic to try and help other people dealing with the same existential challenges that we have here in Louisiana. A couple of those projects that I'm really proud of, that I think this community should be really proud of. Number one, I mentioned the Coastal Master Plan, and we'll come back around to that. But also locally, we've had the privilege of working to help manage the sustainable use of groundwater resources. Everybody knows here in Baton Rouge that the future of the Southern Hills Aquifer is a very important point, not only for our communities, for our public resources, but also for industry. And so we've had the privilege over the last several years, and we'll continue that work with the state of Louisiana to help sustainably manage these groundwater resources. The Water Institute, to kind of back up a little bit, we sit, like many of you sit, in this paradox of water, right? Which is that on one end, water is the thing that invigorates us. It's what gives us life. It's what has given us many of the elements of our culture, right? It's what moves our goods. It's what has shaped our community. But there's also the flip side, the other side of this paradox, which is that water also has the ability to devastate, to destroy, to disrupt our lives, which we all know, whether it's 2016 right in this neighborhood, the 2016 floods, or whether it's, you name one of your children's names, and it's probably going to be a hurricane over the last 25 years. As Jay Grimes, who was here last month, was talking about the prevalence of storms in the last 25 years, and then the intensity of those storms just this year, even though they missed the Gulf. So we have the privilege of working on some really important, critical things locally. But then also, coming from that founding idea of not just helping the problems here, but reaching out beyond our shores, so to say, we have been working in the city of Jacksonville now for 4 years, where the city of Jacksonville reached out and was building a resilience strategy to say, what are our long-term stressors of a changing climate? What are our acute shocks, floods, and heat islands, and how do we navigate these? And so we worked in with a planning exercise with the city of Jacksonville, then started doing modeling efforts for the city of Jacksonville, and now run an operational flood forecast system in partnership with a lot of other entities in the city of Jacksonville. So this idea that Louisiana and Louisianians and the local knowledge of this place can be not only an economic opportunity, but an intellectual and a step up to resilience of other communities is happening day in and day out. Many of you, to kind of take a half step back, many of you have heard, and I mentioned the Dutch that came in after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and they were fantastically giving of their time and their energy and their resources, and we still have a great relationship with many of the entities and individuals from the Dutch government. And one of the things that the local leadership saw when taking trips back and forth to the Netherlands was that if you go to any delta in the world, the Mekong, the Pearl, the Mississippi, you're going to find Dutch researchers, you're going to find Dutch engineers, you're going to find Dutch companies that are working there. It is a not insignificant portion of the Dutch GDP to be the world's leading experts on water and floodplain risk. Well, one of the parts of the story that isn't often told, that sometimes we forget, is that in 1953, when the Dutch had their Hurricane Katrina moment, when the North Sea flooded over 50% of their country, right? When that happened, who showed up on the shores? It was the Waterways Experimentation Station, which is the United States Army Corps of Engineers outfit in Vicksburg, Mississippi, that cut its teeth on the Mississippi River Delta and the Mississippi River, learning how to manage and live with this dynamic ecosystem. So one of the things that I have the privilege of talking here and talking elsewhere about is capitalizing on this generational knowledge that exists in the Mississippi River Delta and the Mississippi River watershed, which I want, mind you, all of you have read, and the 30th anniversary is coming next year of John Barry's fantastic book, Rising Tide. It doesn't just start with Eads. 7,000 years ago, right, and beyond, there were mound-building societies in Poverty Point and Cahokia and all along the Mississippi River watershed, where Native people and indigenous people in the Mississippi River Basin were living out the ideals of living with water, of navigating a dynamic ecosystem. So one of the privileges that the Water Institute has the opportunity to lean into and takes great pride in is this idea that the local knowledge that exists in our communities, that exist in Ascension Parish, that exist in and along the river, that exist in our coastal communities, is not only relevant for its own right. The understanding of the United Home and Nation with how to navigate the bayous of Louisiana, right? It's not just relevant for themselves. We argue, and I think it's bearing fruit, that knowledge and that understanding is relevant to the rest of the world. So that's why we were created, was to help catalyze some of these intellectual and economic opportunities for Louisiana to be the world's leader. Now, we still have a ton of work to do. Our organization and all of our entities, our state governments, our city and municipalities, our research, research community, we have by no means solved all the problems, right? And often, people talk about solutions to these big existential challenges. Oftentimes the problem is there's not really solutions. People are looking for a silver bullet, and we joke sometimes that there's not going to be a silver bullet. Now, if we pull enough threads, this is maybe a tortured reference for somebody who grew up in the Piney Hills in North Louisiana, but we may have a silver buckshot, right? If we pull enough different threads, if we have enough different ideas working together, we may be able to preserve our way of life for a little bit longer. So one of the things that it said we have the opportunity to do is to help catalyze this understanding that exists at the local level. We have the privilege of working right now with many communities around the Gulf South, including the United Home and Nation, which is the largest tribe in Louisiana. We're also working with communities up and down the Mississippi River. Jim has a fantastic recall of dates and numbers, and he will not be surprised to know that next year is the 100-year, or excuse me, we're not into 2026 yet. The next year, 2027, is the 100-year anniversary of the Great Flood of the Mississippi River, right? We just passed through the milestones of 15 years from Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, 10 years from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, I'm missing that up, 20 and 15. And these moments are opportunities for us to take a look back and reflect. And one of the things that we have the privilege of leading with the National Academies of Science and groups up and down the Mississippi River Basin is to help us understand how we are going to commemorate and recognize this 100-year anniversary of the Mississippi River flood. Now, you can look back and talk about what was lost and what was gained. You can look back and talk about how all these pillars of engineering and governmental planning were changed in that moment, and the Flood Control Act thereafter. We can talk about the movement of communities, the migration of blues music and jazz coming back down, the importance to our culture of this singular moment in the Mississippi River Basin. But we're also hoping to use this moment as an opportunity to cast our eyes forward, right? Recognizing that decisions we're living with today, right? What happens at the Morganza spillway? What happens at the Bonnet-Carré? How do we navigate this river and the communities that live around it? These are products of decisions that were made 100 years ago. So we've had the opportunity over the last several months, and we'll continue to work with a group, with LSU, with Tulane, with communities up and down the Mississippi River, to ask the question of, okay, we are now sitting in this hallowed position where the decisions we are making as a community, the questions we are asking are going to be relevant 100 years from now. And so what questions are we asking? What do we want this basin and this delta to look like in 2026, or excuse me, in 2127? That's going to be a critical question for this region to ask. And so we're going to be launching this Mississippi River 100 effort shortly with the National Academies of Science. And I think it's a great opportunity here in Baton Rouge where we are. Plan Baton Rouge 3 is coming out. Right? One of the fundamental ideals coming out of Plan Baton Rouge 3 is that the Mississippi River should no longer be our back porch, it should be our front porch. And they're looking at the river as an asset, not just as a means of commerce or as something that you have to get stuck in traffic going over. I often joke that our building, we used to joke with the Secretary of Transportation that we were going to start putting silent films on the side of our building to give people something to look at when they're coming over the bridge across the river. But that hasn't happened yet, but stay tuned. So there's a lot of really exciting things that, you know, I get the privilege of sitting here and helping catalyze some of the incredible innovation that's coming out of this community. And I want to be very clear, it's not just coming out of our shop. One of the Water Institute's, I would argue, most important roles is not the specific substance of one area of research. It's not the specific, you know, this project or that project. It's our proximity, right? We are an independent applied research organization. We are not a governmental entity. We work very close with many governmental entities. We are not a traditional environmental advocacy group, but we work very closely with non-government organizations around the country. We are not traditionally a part of the private sector, but we work very closely with local and regional and national private sector entities. And we're not an academic organization. We do not train students. Now, we definitely want to hire as many of those fantastic students who come out to help us tackle some of these big challenges. But one of our most important pieces is that we sit in proximity, we sit in between all of these entities. And we have a charge to help catalyze their ideas and to help elevate the entire harbor, to use that analogy rather than just an individual ship. So that's something we're really working towards, is to try and pull on those threads from our relationship from all these different communities. One of the things that I put on your table is meant to show a little bit of where we want to go, right? So over 15 years, I can say unequivocally that the idea of setting this place up was a good idea. I am grateful as a member of the community, and I'm grateful as a part of this effort that leaders like at the Baton Rouge Area Foundation and Senators Mary Landrieu and former Congressman Garrett Graves and Governor Bobby Jindal had the foresight to think up this idea. But I'm also really proud of the work that's been done both at home for Louisiana through the development of the Coastal Master Plan and sustainable use of groundwater resources and finding sand resources all across the community that are necessary for us to rebuild and sustain Louisiana. But also, I have a charge in having the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of saying, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? What are we going to do from here? What is the opportunity? Well, I don't have to tell this group that at least in this year, but really over the last several years, we've had some pretty seismic shifts in the country's priorities and how they fund science, in where they expect that work to be done, in the belief and understanding and agreement on what science is and what it is not and what it is for. So it's been an interesting time to run a scientific organization, to say the least, nationally. So as those priorities change, but then locally, right? We have, obviously, as you've seen in many of your publications, we as a state have been wrestling with some pretty fundamental questions around coastal restoration and protection, and where we should spend these resources. And I want to be very clear, although the Water Institute has done a tremendous amount of research on things like sediment diversions and the coastal master plan and flood protection systems, our job is not to take a position. Our job is not to advocate for this or that project. What we exist to do is to help decision makers, oftentimes governmental entities, help those decision makers make the best possible decision given the facts and the equities and the science in front of them. Now, politicians and government entities and legislators and political subdivisions, they have to make the hard decisions. And so our organization then has to show up the next day to help them navigate the impacts of those decisions. And that's something I'm very proud to say we're doing. But in a year when our local coastal priorities have changed and or have shifted at times, and nationally when science, or at least the funding that is underpinning so much of the scientific research, our organization is very much at an inflection point, right? Which is that the traditional way that this work was done is not the way that it's going to be done in the future. Even ignoring policy changes, right? The state of Louisiana, the numbers are big here, so, but in the coastal master plan, each year we spend between $1.2 and $1.4 billion on projects and planning and engineering and design of all these coastal restoration projects and flood protection projects. But even with no change in policy, at 2031, we fall off a cliff. Because in 2031 is when the Deepwater Horizon funds that are funding most of this coastal protection and restoration, they go away. So the state is very much at an inflection point as well. And so what I placed on your desk is our opportunity at the Water Institute to not only grab onto some of those exciting things and what we're proud of over the last 15 years, but also recognize that we've got to do things differently. That as proud of the work that I am that we've done, we also have to recognize that by and large this work has been reactive, right? Which is that a government entity or a community or an organization comes to us and say, we need some help answering this question. We need some help solving this problem. Can you help us? Well, given what we see both in the funding, in the opportunities, in the intellectual capital, where the opportunities exist in front of us, that reactivity is not fast enough to solve the problems. That reactivity is not fast enough to keep up with the rising seas and the flood risk. We have to be proactive. We have to look around corners. And so from my standpoint, we're trying to take that beautiful building on the river and turn the trim tabs on the rudder to turn the ship to be more of a proactive organization that can look around the corner and solve the problems before the government entities are ready to solve them, which is going to require a big shift. It's going to require a different means of funding. It's going to require a new way of us doing work. One of the things that I'm proud to see our research team jumping on is rather than just taking the projects that come in and doing great work on them, they are identifying key target challenges that say, look, this is the biggest challenge that the world is, that our community is going to be wrestling with, and these are the ones that we have a particularized opportunity to lean into. Also, I will say that, the traditional means of having an impact as a scientific organization, right? We do research, we write a report, we present it to a government body, we hope it doesn't collect dust, we hope they use it, right? That we know that is going to always operate with a certain brick on our heads of the level of impact that we want to have in the world. And so our organization is trying to lean into new areas. How can we get technology out there? How can we create open source data sets for people to jump into? How can we create opportunities for other people to take our work further than maybe we can take it? A couple quick examples, and I know that I'm throwing a lot of different projects and ideas out there, and I'm happy to dive into any of those. But one project that I think is really interesting is one of the roles that we have is to assess and monitor the health of species in the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And so one of the things that we do is we work with some partners and fly over the entire coast from Brownsville to Key West. to assess the nesting bird habitats. I happen to be a bird nerd. I'm a big birder, so I'm always going to default to birds a little bit. But this is a really huge data. Everybody's hearing AI and machine learning and big data sets. This is all in the news right now. Well, this is an amazing amount of data sets. And one of the things we have the privilege of working with the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries and the federal agencies is flying over all of these barrier islands and all these nesting communities of birds and identifying the little points of where the nests are. But then using a deep learning machine model, right, that can identify what these points are. So rather than me having to zoom in and say, well, that's a brown pelican and that's a tern and that's a seagull, right, we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to pick these points and identify what they are. But given what I just said about us wanting to be more proactive and leaning into areas and impact that we may not touch, we then went and asked the federal government and the state government, can we take this a little bit further? Rather than just doing the research and telling you where these bird populations are, can we set this up on a database where anybody in the world can tap into it? And they said, that's a great idea. And so now, avianmonitoring.com, you can go to this website that we've set up, and researchers or bird nerds like myself can go out and identify where all these nesting habitats are, see the trends over many years. So some really exciting overlay of traditional ecological field work, but also artificial intelligence and machine learning, but then finding the funding and the policy behind that. That's really where we sit. That's where we try and lean in, is on these problems that are multifaceted, that are interdisciplinary, and that have a lasting impact on our community. I will, one thing I will note for Baton Rouge, too, is a lot of this, as I mentioned, is about making decisions, making better decisions, right? Using science and planning to make better decisions. Also, one of the things that we know, whether it's with climate variability or climate change or just the on-the-ground decisions, we were talking earlier about floodplain management in New Orleans, the infrastructure decisions, power grids, pipes, all of this uncertainty. One of the things we have to do is make better decisions, sometimes with more uncertainty than we have certainty. And I'm proud to point out that next year, the International Society for Decision Making Under Deep Uncertainty, which is a very detailed body, but is going to be coming to Baton Rouge to host their international conference. It was in London and Denver and in the Netherlands. And so the recognition is widespread and that's not just the Water Institute, but our local research and engineering and planning community are really international leaders, and I'm proud of that. So with that, I will pause and take questions or dive into any of the hot topics that are out in the news and how we may overlap with some of them. Thank you.
Well, I'll kick it off.
Yeah.
One, I know that y'all really do great work, really good deep dives on everything. Has the Water Institute been tapped to look at the Meta Data Center up in Richland Parish, where they're going to be using a significant amount of groundwater? And I know that that's quite an agricultural area up there. So I know a lot of farmers and ranchers really depend on well water there. So has the Water Institute looked at how that aquifer may be affected?
So I need to repeat the questions, right, for LPB. So the question was about whether the Water Institute has been asked to look into the potential impacts on groundwater resources from AI data centers like the Meta Data Center in Richland Parish. So I'll take a step back to say that, my previous role, I served as the environmental section chief for the Attorney General's office under then Attorney General Jeff Landry and Attorney General Buddy Caldwell. And one of the issues that I worked on a lot was the water resources of the state. This is a kind of my particular area of research, water resources and water law. It's an incredibly complex system, but one of the things that you would think in Louisiana, and many people think, how many have seen a press announcement that somebody's thinking about putting a pipe into the Mississippi River or into Toledo Bend, right? Louisiana is generally conceived as this water-rich region, and in many ways it is. But one of the things that we know, and the Water Institute did do a study, I think back in 2018 as early, is that water, whether it be groundwater or surface water, you have to then overlay that with what it takes to reduce it to its intended use, right? So how do you get it from the groundwater to where you need it? How do you get it clarified from a river in order for it to be used at process? So this is something we've looked at a lot. As to the specifics of the Meta data center, we're not looking at that directly. The state Department of Conservation and Energy is looking at that. However, we are working with the Department of Conservation and Energy, which recently this year, under the last state legislature folded in the Capital Area Groundwater Commission, we were doing a sustainability analysis. And so, yes, we have been asked to scope out a statewide water plan. And we intend to do that with the Department of Conservation and Energy, not to look at the specifics of one project, but to take a step back to, there was a legislative auditor's report several years ago, and footnote 2 in the legislative auditor's report is that 2018 study that we did, which described how you would establish a water plan for the state of Louisiana, which we do not have. We do not have a comprehensive water plan. Now, we have a very comprehensive coastal plan, but how to use this aquifer, that aquifer, this well, that well, we don't currently have. So not specifically at Meta and the Richland Parish, but that is something that we have been asked to look into. However, even if we hadn't been asked, that is something we are actively looking into, are the impacts of growth and economic opportunity. Because there's an opportunity that exists in Louisiana because we do. I mean, we work with folks in Arizona and elsewhere. We do have more water resources than other places, but it's not unending. It's not infinite. And so one of the things that we as a state can really move towards is understanding what we have, and then critically understanding what we need. Right? What are the growth patterns in areas like the Chico Aquifer around Lafayette? What are the needs of the economic development opportunities from AI data centers and or oil and gas operations? So really crosswalking what we have, what we need, so then we can determine the sustainability of that plan. So yes, we are looking at it. Yes, sir.
Are you a private LLC, and can you break down your funding, where you get it from?
So the Water Institute is an independent nonprofit corporation. We have a board of directors that, so sorry, the question was whether the Water Institute is a private LLC. So in the technical sense, no, but we are a independent private corporation that is a nonprofit corporation under Louisiana law. We have a board of directors that governs our activities. You'll recognize some of our members. Merritt Lane, the head of Canal Barge, is our board chairman. Christy Brown, who's the head of the McElhaney Company, is our vice chairman. Jerry Jolly, who's a longtime civic leader, formerly of KPMG, is our board treasurer and secretary. Marianne Sternberg, who many of you know, is one of our dedicated board members. And so the question was our corporate structure, but then our funding, right? So the Water Institute primarily operates off of work that it does, right? Where we are being brought in either through contracts or grants, oftentimes by governmental decision makers. So when I first started at the Water Institute, almost 100% of our work was with the state of Louisiana through the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. Now that breakdown is about a third of our work. About a third of our work is for the state through CPRA and other state agencies. About a third is with the federal government, so mostly through agencies that have some responsibility for the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon. And about a third is other sources through private parties, local political subdivisions, cities and other states. So about 6% of our revenue is generated from donations, because we are a 501c3, but most of it is from work that we do for other people. Yes, sir.
Under current policies and practices, has the Water Institute looked at threat assessments to Baton Rouge's aquifer?
Yes. So the question was, has the Water Institute looked at current threats to the Baton Rouge aquifer? Yes. The Water Institute has been working for several years now with what formerly the Capital Area Groundwater Conservation Commission, which now that authority under state law exists under the Department of Conservation and Energy, formerly the Department of Natural Resources. A lot of changes this year. And I feel a law review article coming up. But yes, we have worked, and the primary threats to the Southern Hills Aquifer, in which Baton Rouge exists, there's a potential saltwater intrusion, right, coming, and this is not Gulf water coming in. This is subsurface, and we have produced several public reports on not only the threats that exist, but the opportunities to push back and the alternatives. We conducted a very lengthy analysis that I'm really proud of. We worked with LSU and Dr. Frank Zai on the groundwater model. We worked with local firm Freese and Nichols, local representatives from Freese and Nichols architecture firm, engineering firm, and then with the USGS to help understand what the impacts are to the Southern Hills Aquifer. But then critically, we looked at the overlay of the governance and the regulations and the state statutes that are there, because sorry to dive a little bit into water law here, but Louisiana has what's called a modified rule of capture, which most people think that if you could stick a straw in it, it's yours, right? Now, that is subject to regulation, and so the Capital Area Groundwater Commission, when it was set up in the 70s, was given the authority to regulate groundwater usage. And so, yes, we have worked with them to look at what the physical stresses are, but then what the opportunities are to navigate that.
So what needs to happen to hold off the saltwater intrusion?
Yeah, so what needs to happen, we laid out a series of alternatives that are on the table. We didn't recommend a particular path forward as to, we need to do this, we need to do that. The opportunities are changing the uses, having certain entities that use groundwater moving to river water. There are what are called scavenger wells, opportunities to change how we regulate the different wells. So there's a whole list of alternatives that are laid out in the plan. Is there any likelihood that any of that will get done? Beaux Jones, as a private citizen, would say yes. I think so. I think that I have, working in water law for the last, almost 15 years. I think that there is, going back to 2014, Senate Resolution 171, the Louisiana legislature recognized unequivocally that we need to lean into the way that we manage both surface and groundwater and start rethinking that. I can say that for as long as I've been doing it, right now there's more interest and engagement both at the local, state, and federal level to navigate a sustainable path forward for the aquifers and surface water in Louisiana. So Beaux Jones, as a private citizen, thinks it will happen. What I could say from the Water Institute standpoint is that we worked with the Capital Area Groundwater Commission and DNR, now DC&E, to lay out what could be done, but it's going to take the regulatory and the political will to do it. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that the agency works with a number of environmental groups. What are you doing right now to reduce the polluters that are polluting our great Mississippi River?
Yeah, so the question was that, noting that we've worked with environmental organizations, what are we doing as an organization to reduce the pollution into the Mississippi River, or work with organizations that are there? In terms of, oddly enough, water quality is not an area that we have jumped into as much as water quantity. The water quality areas that we spend a lot of time on are twofold, mostly on what would be called like harmful algal blooms, right? You're familiar with that, and so like hypoxia and harmful algal blooms. We've done a lot of research there, and then salinity as a pollutant, right? So into groundwater systems, salinity of a basin. So in terms of like fate and transport of methyl ethyl whatever into water systems, that's not a primary area of research. However, one of the things that we do a lot of work on and have done a lot of work on is in terms of understanding how the Mississippi River itself moves water and sediment, and thereby pollutants and nitrogen and phosphorus and all of these things. And so I would say that the research that we've done and the research that we'll continue to do and the planning that we'll do will play into the conversations around having a more sustainable river system long term. But in terms of the directed impact, that's not an area that we engage much. Other than cleaning up the river, one of the partners I'm proud to say one of the partners in the Mississippi River 100 effort for the 100 years of the Mississippi River. There are two groups, one through the Lieutenant Governor's Office and Keep Louisiana Beautiful, and partnering with One Mississippi. They're going to be leading through this 100-year commemoration in June, River Days of Action, which are trying to focus people around, the cleanup. This is kind of litter side, not pollutant side. So we've worked directly with some of those groups as well. Yes, ma'am.
So does that, is part of what you're talking about there stormwater related issues? I know Louisiana is really behind, especially Florida. What do you think about that, and what have y'all done with stormwater?
Yeah, so the question was, what has the Water Institute done around stormwater? So it depends on where you are as to how that answer that question, but I'll answer it in both ways. Meaning whether, what your stormwater system looks like. Is it gravity fed, or like the city of New Orleans, is it reverse gravity, right? Are you pumping up? So all of you remember the 2016 floods. A large program came out, $1.2 billion HUD, Housing Urban Development Program, called the Louisiana Watershed Initiative. Louisiana Watershed Initiative has broken the state into multiple watersheds, both on a policy planning standpoint, but also from a modeling and governance standpoint. The Water Institute, although we have experts that do flood modeling and fate and transport modeling in the Water Institute, our role for that larger program, which effectively is stormwater for many communities across Louisiana, we have helped set that modeling framework guidance of what the individual communities and regions are working with, and we've worked a lot on the policy side, right? How many of y'all know how many organizations in the state of Louisiana manage stormwater and floodplain management? So there's 64 parishes, there's 9 regions under the Watershed Initiative. There are 251 different entities with responsibilities over floodplain management in the state of Louisiana, right? 251. So I, again, full disclosure, am not a scientist, right? But nor an engineer, but I do not think that water really cares about political boundaries, unless there's a wall of that political boundary, right? Cares about gravity and the like. So we've been working with the state around the Louisiana Watershed Initiative to help model, and critically, one of the things I'm most proud of is the Water Institute established what's called the Environmental Data and Modeling Catalog, ENDEMIC, which is a way for entities, whether it's a local stormwater contractor or a research institute or a government agency, to take these huge climate scenario models, and rather than what has traditionally been done, which is we put them on a hard drive and we drive them across to this person, hope we know the number to that person, drive it across to that person to then upload all these data sets and these models, we created a catalog. So I remember card catalogs, right? It's a modeling card catalog where you can pull in and check it out and put it back in, so that everybody is singing from the same sheet of music in terms of the models and the data sets that exist. In New Orleans specifically, we've worked New Orleans, even taking the worst climate scenario, even taking, in terms of rainfall over the next 100 years, even taking the worst land subsidence or sinking scenarios, one of the most critical determinants in whether people are going to have wet ankles in New Orleans or wet knees in New Orleans are infrastructure challenges. How many thousands of pounds of Mardi Gras beads are sitting in the box culvert, right? Is there going to be power to that pump? And so the work that we've done in the city of New Orleans is actually around the decision making. So, all right, assuming the worst case scenarios, what scenarios from a turning all the power off, turning this pump off, turning that pump on. And so, rather than saying, well, this is the model into the future, this is how much rainfall we're going to get, we've been working to help the city and the community leaders there navigate what scenarios matter. So we can say, well, actually, if we've got $1 billion to invest, we may ought to invest it in power, right, to make sure that we have power for the pumps, or we may want to invest it in green infrastructure here. So we've worked in both of those layers on that. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the 1927 flood. Congress, as a result of that flood, gave dominion to controlling the Mississippi River. All navigable waterways took water. What did they do? They put in levees. Have you looked at if you open up some of these levees down marshes, what that will do in replenishing those marshes.
So the question was, linking to the 1927 flood and the Flood Control Act and giving the Army Corps the authority to construct a levees-only policy on the Mississippi River, which is called the Mississippi River and Tributaries Project, which is still underway. Has the Water Institute looked at opportunities for reintroduction of the river into the receiving basins as opposed to levees? The answer is yes. Not only for the structured and engineered sediment diversions, the Water Institute has done a large body of research through the coastal master plans, but as recently as this week, we received a National Science Foundation grant to work with UNO and a bunch of folks around, it's called the Crevasse Program. It's a workshop looking at the recent natural crevasses in the levee around Mardi Gras Pass, Neptune Pass, which you may have heard about, into the Breton Sound, looking at the land building capabilities of that, and also how to allow those to operate somewhat free-flowing without having a negative and detrimental impact to navigation on the inside. Those are there's a lot of trade-offs there. So yes, we have looked at that not only at the individual diversion scale or the individual river reintroduction scale, but also writ large, working with both the state and the federal government on how to manage the river as a system with multiple focuses, not just flood protection, but flood protection, ecosystem restoration, and navigation, to how to pull all of those together and balance the trade-offs. Do you have
Any preliminary results on that?
so the preliminary results, there are, yes, multiple studies on the ability of the river to build land. It's happening right now and outside of Neptune Pass and Bay Denise. We have a living laboratory that's there. In terms of how to balance those trade-offs, that's a whole nother can of worms.
1 o'clock, so thank you, Bo.
Thank you.
Good job. Have a Merry Christmas.
Thanks, everybody.
Next week, could you come back and give us all of the updates on the greatness of